Welcome, everyone in the United States, Canada, and around the world to another episode of It's a Wrap with Rap, the podcast of overcomers and useful information that better our daily life and mental well-being. I'm your host, Ron Rapaport. My guest today is John Jay from the United Kingdom. John was educated at the University College School, Hampstead, and Magdalen College, Oxford. After graduating, John became a journalist, working initially for the Western Mail in Cardiff and Thomson Regional Newspaper's City Desk. In 1986, he became the city editor of the Sunday Times, and between 1989 and 2000, he ran the business coverage of the Sunday Telegraph and then the Sunday Times. Now, since 2001, John has worked in the fund management industry and is currently development partner of Brompton Asset Management. John is with us today on the podcast of Overcomers to discuss with us his latest book, Ninette's War, a Jewish story of survival in 1940s France, spotlighting an overcomer who has since passed, born Ninette Dreyfus from Paris. Although subtitled A Jewish War of Survival, John's book is more than that. Ninette's War is a compelling testimony to what it means to be forced to flee from your home, see your family betrayed and murdered, and yet emerge with optimism and plenty of life to be lived. Welcome, John, to the podcast and welcome to the United States.
Hello.
Good
It's
to
nice
have
to
you.
be here.
Well, we're honored to have you. Now, coming from a journalist background, you have written one other book before this one titled Facing Fearful Odds, My Father's Story of Captivity, Escape and Resistance, 1940 to 45. Tell us a little bit about that book, and did it prepare you somewhat to write Ninette's War?
Very good question, Ron. I'd always been fascinated by my father's wartime stories, but he was very reticent to talk about them. He had that in common with an awful lot of war veterans, and his war was a particularly tough one. He spent 5 years in captivity as a Jewish British prisoner of war, hiding his ethnicity for much of the time, escaping 5 times, being recaptured 4 times, being made by the Germans to dig his own grave and then fill it in. And finally, as an escape prisoner of war, fighting in the Prague Uprising, which was the last major battle of the Second World War, still going on after VE Day. And Dad left behind some prisoner of war poems. And I thought that I would try to use that as the starting point for a book. But I never got the chance really to talk to him about his wartime experiences. So I reconstructed the story from his poems, from talking to other prisoners of war, doing lots of background research, and having a few jottings that he'd left behind. But I never really got to go on that journey with him. And when I sat next to Ninette at a charity luncheon in London, raising funds for the protection of the Jewish community in Britain against anti-Semitic attacks. And when I sat next to her and she'd started to tell me her story, I thought here was the opportunity to write a wartime story and actually speak to the person at the center of things and hear her story, um, work with her on various archive materials, various books. And she also gave me her wartime diary, which was really fascinating contemporaneous material, including even coded messages about events related to, Jewish persecution.
Yeah, yeah. What a coincidence that you met her like that.
Yeah, it was
Uh,
a magical occasion. It's
yeah,
about having something lucky, but then having the persistence to go through and make your luck.
yes, absolutely. Now, I guess, well, you answered my next question, where you met Nanette. and learned about her remarkable story. Can you, just for our audience, she was born Ninette Dreyfus from the of the famous Dreyfus family. Now, can you, John, tell our audience who's not familiar with the Dreyfus name, tell us about the family name Dreyfus and what it connotes in France?
Yes, it's a fascinating name. But the great irony, of course, is that Ninette was a Louis Dreyfus as opposed to an Alfred Dreyfus. And although the two families were connected not by people called Dreyfus, but in fact, at some point, a Miss Vile married one particular Dreyfus, and another Miss Vile married another Dreyfus. And Ninette is descended from one line, and Alfred was descended from another. But when she was at school in Marseille, having fled Paris, she was actually in the same class as Alfred's granddaughters. The name Dreyfus itself means that these were people who came from Trier, and the French for Trier is Trèves, and over time the T softened to a D and the V softened to an F, and thus people were called Dreyfus. And this is an example of Jews being having to have conventional secular surnames as opposed to be so and so, son of so and so. You know, I'm Yaakov ben Alexander. That's my Hebrew name. That just means Jacob, son of Alexander.
Yeah.
So that's how the Dreyfus name developed. And they settled. They were thrown out of Trier by an anti-Semitic archbishop, and they moved west and settled mainly in Alsace and Lorraine. And that's where all the Dreyfuses come from.
Now, Alsace-Lorraine, isn't that, as I remember, is that near the German border?
That's right. It's the west side of the Rhine, and of course, much fought over territory. And in the Franco-Prussian War of 1870, the German Empire, Bismarck, seized Alsace and Lorraine, and the Jews there had to choose whether to stay there or whether to stay French. And the vast majority of them elected or opted to be French and moved west, further west. And a lot of them settled in Paris, like Ninette's family, and also the family of Alfred Dreyfus.
Okay. Now, just to give our audience a little perspective on the family, weren't they involved in global commodity trading?
Exactly right, Ron. There was an original man called Louis Dreyfus, and he had many children. And the eldest, and two wives, and the oldest surviving child, in fact, the only surviving child, boy of the first marriage, was called Leopold. And he, at a certain point, turned his father's name into a double-barreled name, and he became Leopold Louis Dreyfus. And he was really the architect of a business that grew into one of the world's largest commodity trading companies, sourcing grain from around the world, from the Ukraine, from South America, from Australia, from North America, and selling it in the markets of Western Europe. And they became one of the wealthiest families in France. They diversified into media, they diversified into shipping, which is a kind of vertical integration, and and they also gradually became involved in politics. And Ninette's cousin Louis Dreyfus, at the outbreak of war, was the senator of the Alpes-Maritimes.
Okay, now I know that that name Dreyfus is going to bring up in our audience, people are going to come up with, wait a minute, I've heard of the Dreyfus affair. Can you give us a little background about the Dreyfus affair uh, what happened there and what it meant for France and the family.
So that is Alfred Dreyfus,
Okay.
and he was a captain, and he was accused of spying for Germany. And the Dreyfus affair was an extraordinary outburst of French anti-Semitism. And France split in two between Dreyfusards and anti-Dreyfusards. The Dreyfusards were typically left of center, commercial. I'm talking about Gentiles as opposed to Jews, because virtually all Jews were Dreyfusards. And the anti-Dreyfusards tended to be rural, monarchist, anti the French Republic, ardently Catholic, and people who believed in the military. And of course, the military had indulged in a vast conspiracy in order to discredit Alfred Dreyfus. And the French writer Émile Zola became the most famous Dreyfusard, writing a famous article headlined J'accuse, I accuse. And finally, having been sent to Devil's Island, which was a horrible prison island, Alfred Dreyfus was finally pardoned and returned to France. But it divided France in a way that virtually nothing else divided France in the late 19th, early 20th century.
Okay, but he was eventually exonerated, wasn't
Yes,
he? He
that's
was
right.
not spying for the Germans.
Exactly. But
No.
lo and behold, in the 1930s, as anti-Semitism built up in France again, you had people who had been anti-Dreyfusards 30 years earlier leading anti-Semitic campaigns and or their children in the 1930s. So it became a terrible dividing line in France.
Now tell us a little bit about Ninette, uh, about her lifestyle and her social circle that the family surrounded themselves. I know, I believe I read that they were related to Albert Einstein, if I'm not correct.
That's right. It's a very interesting cosmopolitan social circle. They were related to Albert Einstein by a couple of marriages. And the when Ninette's father was a boy, he grew up with the Einstein family and would take holidays with them. And Albert Einstein, those of you who are familiar with Albert Einstein will know that he was a fine violinist, amateur violinist. And as a child, he was a bit of a prodigy. And poor Edgar, Ninette's father, as a child, would be trotted out to play alongside Albert and feel a terrible sense of humiliation. So, but he grew up to become the chief executive of the Banque.
Our podcast guest and supporter, Stacey Roberts, physical therapist, master of science in nursing and functional medicine practitioner, brings over 30 years of experience to her new book titled The Pain Free Formula: Solving the Puzzle of Muscle and Joint Pain Without Surgery, Drugs, or Injections, aimed at people who have tried many treatments for muscle or joint pain with limited success and are looking for a more holistic, root cause approach without relying on surgery, medications, or injections. This is not just another book filled with medical jargon or miracle cures. Stacey is a respected physiotherapist and health expert who has helped thousands of people, including professional athletes and celebrities, find real lasting relief, and she puts the entire roadmap in the book. The reader will be amazed how Stacey breaks down the truth about chronic pain, how it is not just about bones or muscles, but about how the body, the mind, and even our habits all play a role in healing. The book will give you a step by step plan to finally take control, to understand your pain, your body, and how to create an environment where healing can happen naturally. Here is the best part: Her approach works without relying on surgery, injections, or constant medications. If you have been living with chronic pain, if you have been told surgery is your only option, or you are tired of just masking symptoms, you need to read the Pain Free Formula. It is not just a book, it is a lifeline. It will teach you how to take charge of your healing journey, how to understand what your body is trying to tell you, and how to use proven methods like soft wave therapy and natural movement to finally live pain free, safely, and effectively. You can obtain the Pain Free Formula on Amazon, available in paperback and Kindle. Don't wait for another sleepless night or another round of failed treatments. Take the first step toward real relief and start your journey to living pain free.
Louis Dreyfus. And although at that time he was a Swiss citizen during the First World War, he was involved in raising funds for the French war effort. And going forward in the 20s and 30s, he was involved in a project to save the franc from devaluation. There was a run on the franc, and a lot of French bankers got together to support the franc, include a number of Jewish firms, Rothschild, Lazard's, Banque Louis Dreyfus, got together to support the franc. And out of that, Edgar was made, given the Légion d'honneur, which you will have in America a similar civil award.
Medal of
And
Honor type thing.
yeah, so he starts off as a chevalier, knight of the Légion d'honneur, and then is promoted to be an officier, officer of the Légion d'honneur.
So
So
this family was second only to the Rothschilds in status, as I
very
understand.
much so, second only to the French Rothschilds. That's exactly right, Ron. And so Ninette has a real silver spoon upbringing.
Yeah,
Uh, She lives in a little cul-de-sac off the Avenue Foch, which is one of Paris's grandest streets. It's even wider than the Champs-Élysées. And she grows up in the house where Claude Debussy, had once lived. And Claude Debussy's piano room and composing room became the Dreyfus family dining room. And next door, at a certain point, the next door house was occupied first by the French singers, singer sewing machine
yeah,
family,
absolutely.
and after that is occupied by Arthur Rubinstein, the Polish American Jewish pianist. And so Ninette plays in the garden with her older sister, Viviane, and listens to Arthur Rubinstein practicing the piano next door. And she goes to find private schools and has all the standard haute bourgeois upbringing, the skiing lessons, the riding lessons, the ballet lessons, the piano lessons, etc., and the visits to the grand spa towns in the Alps. But then, of course, the world turns very nasty.
Yeah, yeah, we're going to get into that. Now, it was said by you that writing this book concerning the Holocaust in wartime France was like restoring a mosaic. What did you mean by that? And please tell us the sources you used to corroborate the events of that time and the facts from Nanette's memory. And you met her, I believe she was getting up in age. She must have been in her late 80s, maybe, that she told you about that had to be corroborated. Could you talk about that?
Okay. My mosaic metaphor is very simple. A mosaic is a series of little chips,
Right.
and together they make a picture. But separated, they're just a pile of stones. And but if you can reassemble the pile of stones, you'll not necessarily have the complete image. There may be stones missing, but you will get a rough feel for what the original image was like. And I think historical research is a bit like that. You have to be humble in the face of the limitations.
Right.
The second point is that memory is a very fragile source for history. One reason, obviously, is the sheer passage of time. The second is that people see things from a different perspective. You know, if there's a car crash out in the street and it's observed by 7 or 8 people, they'll give you 7 or 8 different explanations and descriptions of what happened.
Sure.
So the third point is that one tends with one's memories to see them through the prism of subsequent events. And that can be dangerous because you're reinterpreting the event based on what happened subsequently. And that may not necessarily have been the case at the time. So I had to be very, very careful. I had Ninette's diary. That was an incredibly important piece of the mosaic because that was contemporaneous information. What the young Ninette, what the teenage Ninette felt at any given time during the war, sometimes writing in code, sometimes talking about very important events, sometimes talking about what happened at school and or how she had a spot on her nose or whatever. But it's really, really good information, giving you atmosphere, color and atmosphere.
Do you
So
know
then
what
I
age you know what age she started that diary?
she's tastes wonderful. The first entry is for the 3rd of September 1939.
Wow.
So she's 11.
And
She's
today's the
11
3rd of
coming up to
September.
12. The outbreak of war. The first entry says today France was at war with Germany,
Yeah. Wow.
which is extraordinary. I mean, just perfect. And she's talking about listening to the radio and what a strange feeling it was, and how her Italian nanny was stranded at the border, etc., and where her cousins were. So the diary was very important. But then I backed all that up with an awful lot of, well, first of all, interviewing other people who were alive at the time, Ninette's neighbors, Ninette's friends, Ninette's children, and how they saw her mother, her niece, etc. And then I moved on to reading first-hand accounts of the Exodus from Paris in 1940, and the experiences of other French Jews during the war. And I then moved on to more general history books, always trying to fill in the gaps, find the mosaic pieces in what I suppose a work of reconstruction, which is like a vast mosaic with Ninette and her family in the middle, and the background being, the broader events of the Second World War. And one particular advantage that I had is I went to the BBC archives, which have the entire collection of French language broadcasts by the BBC's French team during the war. Now, this was incredibly important for people in France. They would listen in Ici Londres, and then there would be the first few notes of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, da 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 da. And then they would say, Les Français parlent au Français, the French speak to the French. And Ninette's family would listen into this. So I had lovely material about what they would be listening to at any given time, etc.
So it was kind of like what we have used to have Radio Free Europe or whatever. Uh, that's where they got the real news from.
Yeah, yeah.
Was
This was very important. This was a sort of morale lifeline
oh
to be,
yeah.
there they are in Vichy France, which is collaborating with the Germans, rounding up Jews, handing Jews over to the Germans, etc. And then the Germans arrive in the southern zone near Ninette, and then they arrive on the Riviera. This is a very, very, very frightening time for a teenager. But then
Absolutely.
family is tuning in and listening to the BBC.
Now, for our audience, to get an understanding of the time, can you tell us how wartime France was divided up after there was a French armistice, which was really a defeat in June of 1940? Can you tell us, the audience, because a lot of people, in the audience don't know about it. How was France divided up?
Well, basically, the terms of the armistice involve the Germans occupying about two-thirds of France, the vast majority of its industry, obviously the capital, Paris, and the entire coastline, other than the Mediterranean. So the Atlantic coastline, all the way down from the Belgian border to Spain.
Okay,
And they need that because they're planning to invade England initially, and they need that then to defend potentially against an Anglo-American, D-Day style landing, which
right.
eventually comes. The rest of France becomes something that was initially called the Free Zone and then became called the non-occupied zone. And that was ruled by from Vichy, where there was a French government in exile that collaborated with the Germans. So, in the terms of the armistice, one of the terms was that this sort of satellite state, this puppet regime, had to hand over to the Germans all German and Austrian and Czech citizens. So, in other words, those very people that had fled Germany and Austria, mostly Jews, but also people left of center people, socialists, communists, that then one of the terms of the armistice is that Marshal Pétain hand them back to the Germans. Just the most extraordinary situation. And
Eh,
indeed, what's interesting here is that Eleanor Roosevelt was involved in rescue here. And there was a man called Varian Fry, an American, who based himself in Marseille, funnily enough, staying at the same hotel for a while as Ninette, and who for many, many months got as many artists, writers, composers out of France, mostly Jews, and got them to America. And it was the most extraordinary act of rescue. He's the sort of American Schindler, a man called Varian Fry, hugely important and just an extraordinary man.
John, how much did you know before writing Ninette's War about France going through the various stages of World War II and the plight of the Jews in France? How much did you know about it?
I knew an awful lot less than I know now. Um, what I didn't know was the complicity of French Gentiles in the Holocaust. I didn't know that French Gentiles regularly denounced their Jewish neighbors. I didn't know that in the Free Zone,
Yeah.
I did not know that I wasn't unaware of this vast network organized by the French as well as the Germans to expropriate Jewish wealth. I didn't know that there was many, many, many thousands of French businessmen, French lawyers, French estate agents, French bureaucrats, French police, all participating in expropriating the Jews. I didn't know that French gendarmes guarded camps in the free zone of foreign Jews, and then at a certain point that the French government literally, handed over thousands and thousands of Jews who thought they were safe in the non-occupied zone, handed them over to the Germans for then to be taken to the main French concentration camp, which was just outside Paris, a place called Drancy, and then deporting them to mainly to Auschwitz, either to be worked to death or gassed immediately, or straight to Treblinka and Sobibor.
Yeah, it must have been quite sobering for you that to find that out. Now, how long did it take you to obtain all this information and write the book?
It's a good question. You should ask my wife about how long it was, because she sat with me throughout, both literally and metaphorically, and we would go on journeys of research, go through the Pyrenees to follow Ninette's journey. And
Yeah.
it took the good part of a decade. And
Have you ever wondered how some people manage to turn tragedy into triumph? How they take what could have broken them and somehow transform it into a new beginning? Meet Judy Kim Cage, the author of Super Survivor: How Denial, Resistance, and Persistence Can Lead to Success and a Better Life After Stroke. This remarkable book takes you on a real life journey, one that begins with a devastating stroke but evolves into a story of resilience, humor, and hope. It's not just about surviving, it's about reinventing life when everything you knew suddenly changes. In Super Survivor, Judy invites readers into her world, the world of a woman who refused to let her physical challenges, fear, or frustration define her. She writes with honesty, courage, and even laughter about the realities of stroke recovery, the setbacks, the small victories, and the powerful lessons she learned along the way. It's a story that shows us that denial, resistance, and persistence aren't necessarily bad things. In fact, when used with purpose, they can become powerful tools for healing and growth. When Judy faced her stroke, she didn't know what the future held. But instead of surrendering to despair, she channeled her energy into discovery, discovering new strengths, new possibilities, and new ways to live a full and meaningful life. Her book delivers practical insights, heartfelt wisdom, and inspiring reflections that speak to anyone facing major change, whether it's a health crisis, loss, or a personal challenge that shakes your world. Each chapter of Super Survivor blends personal storytelling with real world advice. You'll find humor in the unexpected, inspiration in the struggle, and encouragement to never give up, no matter what life throws your way. This isn't just a stroke survivor story, it's a human story about rediscovering purpose, strength, and joy. If you or someone you love has faced a stroke, chronic illness, or any life altering event, this book offers a roadmap for resilience. It reminds us that recovery is not just physical, it's emotional, mental, and deeply spiritual. Through Judy's voice, readers find permission to laugh again, to hope again, and to believe that life after adversity can be better than before. Super Survivor also highlights the importance of community and support from family, friends, and professionals, and how leaning on others can actually make us stronger. Whether you're a caregiver, medical professional, or simply someone looking for inspiration, you'll walk away from this book with renewed energy and perspective. One of the most powerful messages in Super Survivor is this: you are not your diagnosis. You are your determination. You are your persistence. You are your spirit to rise. Judy Kim Cage proves that the human will can overcome almost anything when fueled by courage, humor, and an unshakable belief in what's possible. So, whether you're seeking guidance through recovery, looking for motivation to keep pushing forward, or simply want to be inspired by an incredible story of survival, this book is for you. Pick up your copy today and discover how you too can become a super survivor. Because life after challenge isn't the end of your story, it's the start of a brand new chapter. Super Survivor by Judy Kim Cage is available on Amazon or wherever books are sold. Empower your recovery, reignite your purpose, and rewrite your story.
then I ended up with material of, inevitably you fall in love with your research, or lots of people do. I fell completely in love with my research, ended up with many, many, many thousand to, thousands and thousands of words And then when I found a publisher, uh, he said, a magnificent man called Andrew Franklin of Profile Books, he said, it's got to be shorter. And so I cut and cut and cut,
Yeah,
and ultimately got it to a length with which he was comfortable, and thus it was published.
I think that's common among writers to come in with a huge book and then the editors go, no, no, that's not going to work. Yeah.
Yes.
Uh, so can you describe to us life in the quote free zone of southern France for both Jews and non-Jews alike? What was life like in that?
Well, to some extent, until the Germans arrived,
Yeah.
life went on as normal unless you were a foreigner. So if you were a French Jew, life went on as normal. It was different for the French Jews in Paris, particularly the prominent ones, because the Germans deliberately targeted lawyers and then very senior businessmen and politicians. And Ninette's cousin Andre was rounded up in one of these very early roundups. But in the southern zone, you would be investigated for political activities, and that meant resistance activities if you were a Jew. But you might just sit and wait in the hope that things were going to turn up. And if you had savings, you were left with your savings, but your businesses would be expropriated potentially.
And what about were there food shortages,
Well, there
restrictions?
were food shortages for everyone, and if on the Riviera, there's not much production of food other than grapes, and therefore Ninette and her family constantly felt hungry. Ninette constantly felt hungry, but they existed on root vegetables to some extent. But there was also the sea, so there was a certain amount of fishing, and Ninette became an expert diver, going out to a rock beyond where the family had rented a villa to collect oursins for the family. And there was also a black market, and people would go out on illegally out into the countryside to visit farmers and trade their household goods for food. So yes, the black market was very, very important. It was called System D, and that meant the system of getting by,
Okay,
essentially.
so Nanette went from that silver spoon upbringing to where we are now. Uh, Basically, like you said, eating root vegetables and getting by. So she knew what was going on.
She knew what was going on for people generally, and she did communicate with her cousins in Paris, but their phones were tapped. So you had to be very careful about what you said, and you had to be very careful about what you wrote. So it was difficult to know exactly what was going on. That said, if you went to the cinema, there were newsreels full of anti-Semitic hatred, and the French authorities in Vichy also allowed the distribution of German anti-Semitic propaganda translated into French. So, the worst that Goebbels could produce was translated into French and shown in French cinemas. So they had a pretty clear idea of those aspects of the final solution. They did have a clear idea of exactly what was happening in the death camps.
Yeah.
And it was only towards the end of the war, partly because of French language broadcasts on the BBC, and partly because some escaped people who'd escaped from Auschwitz, a couple of men, turned up in on the Riviera and told their story. But their fellow Jews thought that they had nervous breakdowns. They
Hey,
couldn't
they,
believe
they didn't believe it.
what was happening. They didn't
Yeah.
believe it.
Now, the Germans occupied the Free Zone in November of 1942, so things are getting really bad. What was the family's plan? And by the way, I believe the Germans were after this family. They were like target number one, probably. Uh,
Well, Edgar will have been was one of the most prominent Jewish exiles in Cannes, and he certainly thought he was top of the target list. And his cousin Jean Rance, who was Louis Dreyfus's son-in-law, was had been involved in resistance activity, and he was investigated, and he had to flee. But in November 1942, the Germans only went as far as Marseille.
okay.
They did not occupy the Alpes-Maritimes, so the area around Nice and Cannes and Antibes. That was occupied by the Italians. And the Italians were actually not as anti-Semitic as the Germans, despite Mussolini, being, supplying troops to the Eastern Front, etc. And there was a period where the Germans were just the other side of a line outside the Alpes-Maritimes, conducting roundups in Marseille. One of the worst roundups of France during the war was in Marseille in January 1943. But the Riviera remained a sort of haven, protected by the Italian policeman in charge of racial affairs, a man called Lo Spinoso, and he refused to collaborate with the Germans or with Vichy about persecution of the Jews. But then, when the Italians surrendered and signed an armistice, that was the point that the Germans occupied the Riviera. And Ninette, at that point, Ninette's family went into hiding. They had false papers prepared, and the first move was that there was a plan to try and get Jews out of the Riviera by way of Italy and across to North Africa. And that plan failed. Ninette's family had gone to Nice in preparation of that from Cannes. They realized that then the Germans arrived. They went back to Cannes for one night and then, with their false papers, headed it to the Pyrenees, to Po, where they were looked after by the phrase is righteous Gentiles.
Okay, so the family plan, as the noose was getting tighter and tighter, was to avoid getting caught and escaping over the Pyrenees Mountains to Spain.
That's right.
Okay. So can you tell us a little bit about Nanette's lifestyle during these harrowing times and her demeanor about it?
This is an interesting question, because if you're a teenager, you actually potentially feel that you're in as much in an adventure
Yeah.
as a horrifying situation, because the world is very exciting and you feel quite fearless and you feel indestructible. That's what teenagers feel quite often. And Ninette, as a middle teenager, saw a lot of her experiences as a grand adventure. Her older sister, being a couple of years older, Viviane, who became a famous French writer after the war, called under the name Viviane Forestier. Viviane had a more adult or more mature feeling for what was happening. But for Ninette, quite a lot of it was a grand adventure. Um, but then suddenly there were times when reality became very painful indeed. There was an instant where she held on to her official real papers alongside her false papers and left them on the counter of a pharmacy by accident.
Wow.
And it was one of the most frightening nights of her life. She just had a sleepless night. Following morning, she turns up at the pharmacy, having not told her parents, turns up at the pharmacy and says, "Have you got my papers?" And the pharmacy, who was a good Frenchman, said, "Here they are. You have just done the most stupid thing that you could possibly have done. I, I am not going to betray you, but I could have been a collaborator. I could have betrayed you, and then you would be arrested."
Yeah.
And so that was, a very, very difficult point for her in her life. Another very, very scary moment. She and her mother and her sister had been to the cinema in Poe. They're hiding in plain sight. They've got their false papers. Ninette is, instead of Ninette Dreyfus, she is Nadine Delma. Notice the same number of syllables
Yeah.
for each name, same letter starting each name. So as Nadine Delmar, she'd been to the cinema, and they're walking down the street in Poe back to the place where they were in hiding or hiding in plain sight. And suddenly the road is closed in front of them, and they see a roundup with a man arrested, piled into a truck, etc. So reality very much intruded. And then, of course, reality really intrudes when she flees over the Pyrenees because she has to get past the German border guards. And at one point, the passeurs, these smugglers who smuggled her to safety, alerted her and her mother to the fact, and her cousin to the fact that there was a German patrol nearby, and they dived into a ditch. And Ninette, as she remembered it, felt that she could almost feel the breath of the German guard dog on her. But because it was a wet and rainy night, and they were in a ditch, her scent was reduced relative to what it might have been on a dry evening. So the dogs did not, through smell, respond or bark and say that and
Yeah.
identify hidden Jews,
Yeah.
as it were.
Now, did Annette tell you what she suffered from the most from during those growing up years coinciding with the war?
The eviction from her childhood home was very, very important to her. Her childhood home, as it was, was the magical kingdom of her childhood. It was so important to her. The nursery, the playroom, the piano room, her bedroom, and um, you know, that was emotionally very, very important to her. And the eviction from that sort of childhood paradise. We're all, to some extent, as we grow up, evicted from a childhood paradise. I mean, that's what adolescence and being a teenager is all about.
Yeah.
But if you are evicted in awful circumstances in wartime and you take part in the exode, and you've got millions of French people on the roads, walking, cars going along at a snail's pace, people with all their belongings in a pram on their backs. You see families with farming families with all their possessions piled up on a lorry or a tractor with mattresses and chickens and all that sort of thing, then you're seeing chaos.
Yeah.
You're seeing chaos that you've not seen in your protected childhood, and it's very, very traumatizing. And when she was in the southern zone, to make her mother feel happy, Ninette was quite a good amateur artist. She would draw the family home and give the images of the family home to her mother as a present, to
Wow.
say this is what we've said goodbye to.
What did Nanette do after the war in her adult life?
Well, she got back from the war. Her education had been wrecked. She was a reasonable student at the Lycée Capron in Cannes, but of course, when she went into hiding, there was no more proper education. And then, when she was in Spain in exile through to 1945, there's no education. But she came back and enrolled at a distinguished Parisian art school called the Académie Julian, and did quite well. She was the kind of co-head of class with someone who subsequently became a famous sculptor. But she was also a bit of a dilettante, and she was apprenticed to a man called Paul Colin, who was a famous French graphic artist, who'd done the various posters in the Jazz Age. Um, but she was not sufficiently focused. And at a certain point, Paul Colin said, you're not going to take this seriously. It doesn't make sense. She then became a volunteer social worker looking after troubled veterans first from the Second World War, and then from the early period of the communists fighting against the French in French Indochina, what became Vietnam.
Okay.
Um, and at a certain point, she met her future husband. Uh, she at the time in her early 20s, she saw herself more as a sort of marriage broker. She would put her friends together with uh, blokes she thought might be compatible. And at a certain point, David turned up from England on her doorstep, and her first thought was, well, which of my friends would like David? But David had other things in mind, and very, very quickly proposed to her. And after a certain amount of resistance by Ninette, she decided that he would be the love of her life. And he was the oldest son of an English lord, and thus, when his father died, he became. It was an hereditary peerage. The family had originally been the founders of an investment bank called Samuel Montague, founded obviously originally by Mr. Samuel Montague. And the original Samuel Montague had been given an hereditary peerage, and thus Ninette became Lady Swaithling when her husband David inherited his father's title. So that's how she ended her life as the Dowager Lady Swaithling. But the Montague family, a very interesting family as well. Americans probably, some of them might be familiar with a thing called Operation Mincemeat, not least because it's been turned into a Broadway musical. And this was an operation by the English they got a dead body with apparently secret plans, and released it from a submarine off the coast of Spain. And the plan was that the Spaniards, collaborating with Hitler, would see the plans and pass on the plans to Hitler. And basically, the plan said that any invasion of Sicily was merely a feint, and the real invasion was going to be either in Greece or Sardinia. The result of which is that Hitler withdrew troops from Sicily, and that made the Sicily landings much more successful than they might have been.
Huh.
And the brains behind it was a man called Ewan Montagu. And it was one of the most successful deceptions, well, ever in military history. And Ewan Montagu, Ninette, when she went to meet the family, heard these stories. And Ewan Montagu was a man of considerable humor because when David Niven, if you remember David Niven,
Sure.
in the film The Man That Never Was, Ewan said, I want to have a bit part in this film. And the bit part I want is I want to be the naval officer who says the plan can never work. So
Interesting.
anyway, so she married into a very interesting family.
Yeah, and I understand she had three children,
That's right.
well, and six grandchildren, and she passed away uh in 2021. Is that correct?
That's right. No, just one grandchild. One
Oh, one,
grandchild.
oh, one grandchild.
One
Okay.
grandchild. Who is
And
the singer Delilah Montagu. She's based in America. So, and some of, if you look on YouTube, you'll find Delilah Montagu as a young singer-songwriter, and that's Ninette's granddaughter.
okay. And she also brought to light, didn't she do some work where she brought to light people who saved Jewish people during the war as
Very
well?
much so. So in Yad Vashem, your Jewish viewers will know about Yad Vashem, the Holocaust memorial in Israel. They have an honor that they bestow on people, righteous Gentiles. And Ninette organized for the people that looked after her in Poe, uh, um, Pierre and Madeleine Barthes, to be honored as righteous Gentiles. Because if you looked after a Jew in wartime in occupied France, you and were caught, the potential punishments could be very, very severe. You could be sent to a concentration camp, not necessarily a death camp, but to a concentration camp.
Yeah.
And smugglers who were caught smuggling Jews ended up in some of the worst concentration camps and died through mistreatment. So the downsides of looking after a Jew were really quite severe. And and that needs to be borne in mind. There were very, very honorable, decent, and courageous French people who looked after Jews during the war, and they could have lost their lives as a consequence.
Sure.
And Pierre and Madeleine Barthes were just two of those people. And they looked after not just Ninette's family, but a number of other immediate family, but a number of relatives as well. And the other person who Ninette organized to be recognized was the family cook of her cousin Manon. And Marie Conti, basically, when Manon's father, Jacques Lovenbach, was arrested and deported, she looked after Manon, who was in a terrible state, as you might imagine, seeing your father being arrested, beaten up and arrested in front of you. And he then has the courage to say, because they had false papers, this is my Gentile mistress of his daughter. And so take me away, but don't take her away.
Yeah. Wow.
And then she's hid. Marie Conti hides her in a pigsty, looked after by local farmers, and then guides her to Po, and thus she goes over the Pyrenees with Ninette and her mother at the same time. So Ninette wanted these people to be recognized.
How did the family, briefly, how did the family fare after the war?
The family came back to Paris, but the French government then refused to give them their house back. They said any house occupied by the Germans is going to be requisitioned. And the great irony is that it was requisitioned by the Department for Refugees and Deportees. And Edgar turns up at that department, says, "Please, may I have my house back? I've been a refugee, and most of my relatives have been deported, and I don't know where they are." We're in 1945, and the people still don't know whether their relatives have been killed. And the French government says, "No, you can't have your house back." And it took many, many months to get the house back, and by
Wow.
which time Ninette's parents didn't want to occupy the house, and Ninette's father retired, and while also trying desperately to find out what had become of his sister, who was deported right on the very, very last mass transport of the war. Tante Alice, Ninette's Aunt Alice, was deported in her 70s as a disabled person. So the Germans, by that stage of the war, were just so hungry, even though the British tanks and French tanks and American tanks were steaming towards Paris to deport as many Jews as they could possibly find, people in their 70s. They cleared out the orphanages, children, and that last transport included Ninette's aunt.
It's horrible. Uh, did she make it?
No,
No,
no, none of them came back.
none of them.
None of them came back. One cousin survived to be transported from Auschwitz to Belsen. And then, those of you who remember the history of Belsen, there was a terrible typhus outbreak right at the end of the war. And that was the typhus outbreak carried away Anne Frank. And if we think of Ninette's cousin, Nicole, I think, she's dying in the next door hut, if you know what I mean,
Yeah.
at the same time.
What was Nanette's attitude toward France and the French people after the war?
Very good question. On the one hand, recognizing the heroism of a few people, but also appalled by active or passive collaboration with the Germans by Gentiles. And she said to me, the Germans are foreigners, but the French, they are my people. So how could they do this to me?
Yeah.
It's that sense of dispossession. It's similar, to the house. France was her house, and she was being evicted from her house. And she was also appalled to find residual anti-Semitism in France after the war, even after all the newsreels of the Belsen and in particular, because that was liberated by the British Army, so quite quickly there were newsreels showing the appalling circumstances of Belsen, and she just really struggled to believe that French people could still be anti-Semitic. And she found this with an early boyfriend. She went to his house. He was, an aristocrat, the child of I'm trying to remember whether it was a count, whatever, an aristocrat, of like,
Yeah.
and her would-be prospective father-in-law looked at her and said, "You've got frizzy hair, haven't you? In other words, I'm identifying you as Jewish." And she turned around and said, "Well, at least I'm not bald." And she said that was the first time I was ever rude. First time I was ever rude to an adult.
Wow.
And uh, and then in later life, she became involved in fundraising for this organization, the Community Security Trust in Britain, that looks after Jews on, Jewish children, Jewish cultural events, synagogues. And so she was a considerable donor to them. And she also gave her family papers to the Wiener Library, which is the main Holocaust archive and museum in London.
What do you hope the readers take away from reading the book, and what would you think Ninette would want them to learn from her life experience?
What I, a history book is not prophecy, it is memory.
Hmm.
But if we don't remember things, we're destined to repeat the mistakes that people have made in the past, be they mistakes, moral mistakes, ethical mistakes, or efficiency mistakes, or whatever. People are doomed to make the same mistakes if they don't know their history. And the problem today is that the Holocaust is fading from memory for a lot of people, and there is a lot of Holocaust denial, and there is an appalling revival of anti-Semitism across the Western world. And so I would like people to read this, Gentiles as well as Jews, as a way of understanding how anti-Semitic thought and speech can sometimes lead, or racist thoughts and speech can lead to racist actions. And it was French people brought up on a diet of anti-Semitic vitriol who manned internment camps. It was French people who participated in the expropriation of Jewish families to pauperize them. It was French train drivers who drove the trains and would have heard the screams of pain and distress in those cattle trucks, drove those trains to the German border. So there was a whole infrastructure of French people actively participating in what the Germans called the final solution to the Jewish problem in France. So
What
we need
did
to
you,
remember that.
yes, absolutely. What did you learn writing this book that you didn't know or ever thought about concerning survival?
That's a very, very good question. The survival can be a matter of luck. It can be a matter of judgment. It can be a matter of social capital. Survival can result from many things. Survival, so I'll give you an example. Ninette's father equips the family with very good false papers, realizes that he should have taken action earlier, uh, talks about his regret that he didn't take action earlier, but at the end of the day, he took action and organized false papers. Now, he organized very good false papers. That's based on social capital, based on contacts, one might say. The fact is, the master forger, or a man called Roger Appel, who later perished in Auschwitz, the master forger of the Riviera, who had previously worked for the Dreyfus Company, produced their false papers. The man who looked after them in Pau had happened to have a friend who was in the film business, who happened to know the Louis Dreyfuses because one of the Louis Dreyfuses had been involved in the early phases of the Cannes Film Festival. So there was connections. Okay. But there's also luck. Ninette's uncle Jacques has equally good false papers, but goes to Beauvais in the Basse-Alpes as opposed to Pau in the Pyrenees, with the aim possibly of going over the Alps to Switzerland, but is denounced. at a point where the Germans were paying bounties to French people to denounce Jews, is denounced in hiding and is rounded up. Is that luck or judgment, accident of fate? All these things. The fact is, if we look at the survival statistics in the French Holocaust, uh, most of the majority of Jews who died in Auschwitz were foreign-born Jews who'd come to France or their parents had come to France. The statistics were something like 40% of foreign-born Jews. With the French-born old families, it was 12%. It's because they had better social connections. And but, if you were in the elite and didn't get out, then the statistics reversed again. Rabbis, politicians, lawyers, senior business people, they were serious targets and were rounded up in greater numbers than 12%. And these were people in Ninette's family and in the family's social circle.
How can people contact you and where may the book be purchased? I believe it was just released.
So yesterday was publication day in America.
Wow.
It
Okay.
seems that books in America are published on a Tuesday. And my book was published on a Tuesday, day after Labor Day. And it is available. We have a classic expression in English. It quotes in all good bookshops. So if it's there, it's a good bookshop. If it's not, it's not a good bookshop. Of course, you can order it.
All good
Um,
bookshops. Okay.
but so for instance, I've been wandering around Manhattan over the last day or so, and Barnes and Noble have been stocking it. So there's the biggest bookshop, but also Amazon are selling it, and obviously various other online bookstores and independent bookshops are selling it. So there are various different places, and it's also available in Audible form and Kindle form as well as the hardback.
Oh, good. Okay. We'll
In
put
terms
that
of
in.
contact, sorry, carry on. Well,
Yeah, I'll put that in the podcast notes.
in terms of contacting me, do anyone who wants to talk to me about anything in connection with the book or anything in connection with their own stories, you'll find that there's an author's website, which is www.johnj.co.uk. And that's my author's website. And you can email me at john@johnj.co.uk. And love to
Okay.
talk to anyone because about their own stories, because these are stories that need to be told and passed down to children and to grandchildren because it's very, very important.
Absolutely. And we'll put that in the podcast notes. Is there talk of perhaps a movie? Because I read the book and this could be a movie.
I think it would make a great movie. I
It
think it would
would.
make a great movie. There are interesting challenges because you've got the central character growing up from being 11, to 16 or whatever, if you take it to the end of the war. You need a versatile young actress who can play, a prepubescent through to, late teens. Um, but I think you've got some graphic stories. You've got the hiking over the Pyrenees to safety, and the Exode was an extraordinary event. A number of your readers will have read Suite Française and seen the film Irène Nemirovsky. It was an extraordinary event, the biggest um, movement of civilians ever in Western Europe, as millions of people took to the road while being dive bombed by German Stukas at various points.
Wow. Do you have any new projects coming up in the future, John?
What's the next project? I'm thinking about a novel. So turning
Okay.
to fiction, but there may be another fact book that comes along. The main thing at the moment is Ninette's War.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
focus at
And
the moment.
you're always welcome to come back for tell us about the next project that you completed. I want to
Well,
thank you, John.
I'll
No, I want to thank
I'll
you, John.
take you up on that.
Yeah, please do. I want to thank you, John, for being on the podcast and enlightening all of us about Nanette's War. Like I said, I read the book. I recommend it to everybody. It's a great book, and you'll learn a lot about history, and hopefully, this history will never be repeated. Uh, I wish you good health, good fortune, and all your endeavors going forward, John. I want to encourage anyone interested in history, survival, and the Holocaust to read the book. It's an outstanding read. So, once again, thank you, John, for being on.
Well, thank you, Ron, very much. I've enjoyed myself a lot, and that's down
Great.
to you.
Great. Comments and suggestions for the podcast, you can email me at itsawrapwithrap@gmail.com. We have a Facebook group. It's a Rap with Rap. We have a couple thousand members. That is a private group. So if you want to join, you'll have to email me. We're on Instagram. It's a Rap with Rap podcast. We're also on X at Rapper, WRAPPER 130. We're on social media, Blue Sky, and we're on Mastodon. And of course, all the podcasts are on YouTube. It's a Rap with Rap, the podcast uncut. Our website is itsawrapwithrap.com. I want to thank everyone for listening or viewing. I want everybody to please stay safe. And for now, it's a wrap. This podcast is being brought to you in part by the veteran-founded Hero Soap Company located in Phoenix, Arizona. In today's environment, we must be aware of the products we apply to our skin. As a two-time cancer survivor, I cannot afford to take chances, and I use these products myself. The soaps will leave you feeling clean and refreshed. All the products made by the Hero Soap Company are made in the United States with the highest quality ingredients sourced from companies in the United States whenever possible. The products are made in small batches to ensure high quality and contain premium essential oils and fragrance. All hero soaps are created without synthetic colorants, parabens, and sulfates that are irritating to the eyes, skin, mouth, and lungs, and are cruelty-free, meaning these products are not tested on animals. Each 5-ounce bar of soap is handmade in Phoenix, Arizona, and the body wash is available in 8 ounces with such refreshing scents as lime, bourbon, and frost. You will absolutely love this soap. Please also check out their gear for sale. All the products are reasonably priced. Being veteran founded, the company understands the dedication and sacrifice that each family makes to serve their country. A portion of sales is donated back to charities such as Operation Finally Home, Operation Interdependence, and the Gary Sinise Foundation that are focused on helping veterans and our first responders. Over 1,000 bars have been sent to our deployed troops. Please check out their website, herosoapcompany.com, for pricing and a detailed description of all the products. Now, when ordering, please use the code RAP for a 10% discount. The company information will be listed in the podcast notes.